Welcome everyone to the Preschool Mindfulness Summit. Today I'm really excited to introduce you to Dr. Jennifer Fraser. She is a great friend of mine and also very experienced educator and author of multiple publications. She has a PhD in comparative literature and is trained to take different discourses such as education, neuroscience, mindfulness, and put them into a dialogue. She's the author of a new book coming out soon called The Bullied Brain: What Neuroscientists Know About Brain Scars and How to Heal Them. And she's just a really passionate educator who is trying to do good in the world and bring lots of different programs and understandings to educators and different organizations. So welcome, Jennifer, and thanks so much for joining us today.
Hi, Helen. Thank you so much for having me. It's lovely to talk with you as always.
Thanks. So all of Jennifer's contact details will be in her speaker bio, all her social media and website. And she's very kindly given all of you a free course called The Neuroscience of Early Childhood Introduction. And we'll have the link to that. So that's free. There's a coupon code which we'll put in the speaker bio as well for you to go on and get that. And she has lots of other great early childhood courses available as well. So check those out. And her session today is called Tapping into Empathy Through Mindfulness. So really excited to learn more about that. So Jennifer, tell us, first of all, just maybe define what you mean by empathy for all of the viewers watching today.
Well, it's a really good question because I find that we tend to mix up empathy sometimes with compassion, and we sometimes mix it up with sympathy. And so one of the most important ways to think about it is to understand that it actually is a brain phenomenon. So compassion and sympathy are things that we make choices about, whereas empathy is wired into our brains. So they now know that when a baby is born, it's wired for empathic responses. And you know, the great discovery that probably I'm sure you've all heard of is the mirror neurons, and the fact that we actually have these brain cells or these neurons that are in our brain that are specialized in terms of imitation and response. And so if I was watching you speak and talk to somebody, my mirror neurons, because I'm experienced in that world, would also be activating and lighting up, and I would be almost experiencing that phenomenon with you. And so one of the most important studies on this was Dr. Tanya Singer. She was the first person that put somebody into they were having neuroimaging done, which is typical, of course, in these studies, while they were having their finger pricked with a needle. So of course they were suffering pain and their brain was reacting and so on. But what Dr. Singer did that was new and innovative and changed our understanding was she had a second person who was simply observing. And what absolutely shocked the neuroscientists and Dr. Singer and her team was that the person who was observing, their brain was activating as if they were feeling the pain themselves. And so, they saw these two brains. And what was really interesting is that the person feeling the pain is having a more intense reaction, of course, and all they can think about is their pain, because that's how we survive, is we learn, don't let pins prick your finger because it hurts. Not a good thing. So it's survival, obviously evolutionary, and we get that. But what's fascinating is that when someone's observing, they don't have it to the same impact, or they would only be able to focus on their own pain. What they have is a milder version, so that they can say, when someone says, I feel your pain, they actually do feel your pain. Right. They also feel your happiness. They also they understand your intention or motivation. So it's completely amazing to me that our kids are born, they come into the world wired for empathy, and we do things wrong as they progress through, so that with some kids, we really blunt their empathic responses. And so a big thrust of my work is to say, okay, well, we know this now. How about we change the way in which we work with kids, and how about we work really hard to enhance and activate and light up their empathy, it's already there. And be really sure that we're not activating non-empathic responses like bullying behaviors, for example.
Yeah, really, really important. I think that we learn this as educators, and advocates like you try to get this into teacher training schools and make us more aware. So tell us a little bit, Jennifer, about how mindfulness helps us access empathy.
Well, it's one of the things that I think certainly in the 21st century, I know you and I talk about this, and it's something that we feel, and just try and imagine how it feels to be a child in the developed world today with the onslaught of technology and our very sped up culture, and a culture that really believes that acceleration somehow is more valuable. And so, empathy can easily get lost when we're going so quickly and we're in such a rush, and our physiology, our brain and our body are in this kind of constant state of fight, flight, or freeze. As we all know, we talk about this a lot. But what we don't seem to follow through on or talk about enough is, okay, if we're in this constant high cortisol stress hormone state, we're in a rush, our kids are bombarded with technology and advertisements and all of these expectations, and their parents are stressed and they're driving them from here to there, and nobody is calming down, nobody's slowing down. It means nobody's lowering the cortisol. And cortisol, as I'm sure everybody knows, it's a stress hormone that's super healthy. It's really good for you if you're being chased by a saber-toothed tiger on the Serengeti. It's awesome to have your cortisol pump up and your adrenaline, and off you go. You're fleeing, or you decide you're going to fight the tiger regardless. You're going to be fine. It's really great. It's just that when you are constantly having cortisol spiking up because you're nervous about a test, or you have to speak in front of the class, or the teacher is making you write on the board and you're not sure how to do a mathematical sum, or kids are isolating you, any of the cons, your parents are fighting, your parents are worried about money, your parents don't have time for you, whatever it is, our kids have way too much stress, activity, and busyness in their lives. And mindfulness is amazing, as everybody's been talking about, and you're an expert, but mindfulness allows us to slow down. And then as soon as you can get a kid or an adult with their parasympathetic system activated, so that the deep breathing is getting their physiology, their heart rate, their blood pressure, their brains, the cortisol's dropping, everybody's calming down, and you're using breathing and awareness and essentially self-empathy is how I think about it. You're starting to be kind, to your own memories and your own thoughts and your own worries. You're not judging, you're just letting them go. You're showing yourself a lot of empathy. And the research shows, and is very clear, that when we have this type of calm, this self-empathy, this self-compassion, ultimately, we're able to bring those things out into our worlds. And we're able to look at others with kindness and compassion and a much more gentle, slowed down space between stimulus and response. And this is where, we get kids that are non-reactive. We have, very young children who are even able to calmly pause, to think about what they're doing, and to imagine what it's like to be someone else. That's really just the golden state that we get from mindfulness.
Yeah. Love that. So tell us a little bit more about this term self-empathy and what neuroscience have found about how it relates to mindfulness, or what happens in the brain when we get into these states of self-empathy.
Well, one of the greatest things that I've read, it's just come out this year, and it's the Neuroscience of Mindfulness by Dr. Stan Brodsky. And he teaches in his book, and I draw on as much as I can in my mindfulness for preschoolers and early childhood education. I really try and draw on his research, where he, over the course of 30 years, has learned that, and through neuroimaging, he's learned a lot about, for example, there's an increase in the brain. It's very visible. It can be seen in hippocampal volume, which is, a phrase that just talks about the hippocampus, which, as everybody knows, it's our site for memory and for processing emotion and for learning. It's an absolutely critical part of the brain for all of those things. And one of the things that's really frightening is if you look at brains that have been badly abused emotionally or neglected emotionally, or brains that have been sexually or physically abused, they have very shrunken hippocampuses. So it's really what I think of as empathy is it's the opposite of bullying. It's when you are tapping into your natural, your programmed, your healthy concern and care for others. And it's how we build communities. And as humans, when we really don't have the same kinds of protective things like sharp teeth and fur and things that allow us to survive, we really need empathy in order to understand the people who have the power, the people that we live with and work with and have families with. And we need to share our emotional selves. And that's where the empathy is so incredibly important. And this is where we see changes in the brain, in cortical thickness, in hippocampal thickness, the parts of our brain that are so important, not just for learning and doing well in academics, but also your area of expertise, social emotional learning. We really see a change in the brain that's incredibly positive. And so one of the things that I love about Dr. Stan Brodsky's work and what he can do so effectively with children is instead of sort of having them do the kind of adult things that we might do where close eyes and, get into your body and slow things down and sit and hold a position, which is really hard when you're a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old. Dr. Stan Brodsky uses coloring. And his coloration and his coloring and the way in which he uses it as a kind of play therapy or an anxiety reducing practice, his research is very clear that things like knitting, gardening, or for little ones, coloring really brings a lot of the same benefits as a monk practicing very, very advanced meditation and mindfulness. And so, it's something we can all do. Like he tells funny stories about executives who are, they're high powered and they're having their big, and then they go and they open up their coloring book and they close the door. And they calm themselves down so that they can be more productive and they can be less reactive and healthier and smarter and wiser because they took those 10 minutes. And it doesn't have to be hours and hours. It literally can be 10 minutes, and it's shocking what it does for the brain and the body.
Yeah, really interesting. And as you say, just these short little things, I think people have maybe a perception that it might take hours every day and you have to do all these things, but it's really good to see so much research coming out about these kind of mindful moments or these little snippets of time that can make such a huge difference to people. So tell us, you talked about trauma, so tell us a little bit about young children and how important it is to have an empathetic caregiver, whether they've experienced trauma or not. How important is that? Because we know the early years is, has such a big impact on the rest of people's lives. So tell us a little bit about the neuroscience of that.
Well, I think one of the best people on this subject for me, anyways, it came very, very clear for me, something that can sometimes be hard to teach someone else or have an early childhood educator or a parent understand why this is so important, because in a sense, it's kind of counterintuitive. But if you take, for example, a child who is in a lineup, this is from Dr. John Medina's work, what is it? Brain Rules for Babies. Yeah. And he says, you're in a lineup with a kid, you're in the bank lineup, it's going to take 10 minutes, it's going to take a long time, but you have to deal with whatever it is. Let's say it's the grocery store, the bank, whatever it is you're doing, you're stuck. And you've got your 2-year-old or your 3-year-old or you're holding the hand of your 5-year-old and they say, I'm thirsty. I really, really need a glass of water. And you're like, oh, please no. Just hanging there. And so, he talks about the various things that we do and how counterproductive they are. And he argues that if you take that moment with a child and you show the child empathy and you role model empathic behavior with them, you are going to take a potential temper tantrum or a breakdown or having to leave the line because your child isn't just not coping. He says what you do is you say to your child, I am so thirsty too, and I know exactly how you feel, and it feels awful, and I would love a cold glass of water, and let's both of us think about how nice it's going to be. Maybe, what about a popsicle? Like, let's get something fabulous that's going to help us with our thirst. I know you're thirsty, and you're just being amazing the way you're hanging tough here. And he says, oh, people think that's like pouring fuel on a fire, and the child is just going to become mesmerized with how much they're thirsty. He says the absolute opposite. So empathy, if you think about it, it has an instant mindfulness impact. It has a sudden moment where two people are kind of being mindful together. They're connecting on the level of, I see you, you're present to me, I feel your thirst, I know what it's like, and my heart and my mind are with you. And just that kind of understanding and that connection and that empathic moment can take something that's about to become very reactive or very triggered and calm it down. So if we take that to your question about what do we do in trauma and what do we do with struggle and stress, what can happen is, we all know, any of us who've been parents, any of us that have been teachers or working with early childhood education programs, you can become triggered by a child's very emotional reaction. And you can feel a surge of your own emotion, which of course is the worst thing possible, because then you don't act in ways that are probably most productive for the child. You can increase their fear or their anxiety or their distress by having this very triggered reaction. So what we have to do is practice our own empathy and role model our own empathy for ourselves, which we can do by taking those 7 to 10 minutes a day and calming ourselves down and being mindful and slowing it down and feeling a lot of kindness. And I mean, the research shows that if we can take that time when we aren't in a struggle and stress moment, and we can build up our neural networks and our very positive neurotransmitters like our dopamine and our serotonin, the things that we know flow into the brain when we feel gratitude and when we feel love. And with children, if you could even, and to be honest, I've seen no research on this, but I can't help but wonder, what we do know is when your baby looks at you and you look at your baby, or your child that you're taking care of, your primary caregiver, your 1-year-old, and they gaze deeply into your eyes, it activates your oxytocin. It makes it flow into your brain. And it starts from the very beginning for a baby. It's remarkable. They come into the world and this loving hormonal reaction is right there as soon as they connect with the adults in their world. So I wonder, could we train ourselves so instead of getting a big rush of cortisol and adrenaline because we're getting triggered from our own past or our own anxiety, and the child is screaming, and we get this feeling, this awful surging up of a very, potentially destructive, reaction, could we shift it by really consciously, really trying hard, even visualizing oxytocin? Could we make that flood into our brains instead, bring our cortisol levels down? And the research into mindfulness, as you know, and empathy as well. There's a recent book has just come out by Dr. Helen Reese at Harvard. I think it's called The Empathy Effect. And it is remarkable what we can do very consciously with our brains by putting into practice these sorts of things. The problem is we usually end up, we think about these things in the moment because we don't like how we reacted. And really what we have to do is, it's got to be a practice that's daily. It's got to lead up to the moment. But if you do have that in your toolbox and you're working with a number of young children, and you're able to tap into very consciously an empathic reaction to their pain or their fear or their anger, you're gonna be much more effective and much more productive for them in the long run, even in situations of struggle and stress.
Yeah. I think, as you said, it's so important, and it's really a big missing piece in a lot of training and knowledge of in a lot of teachers' knowledge at all levels, right? I think not just in early childhood. So you mentioned eye gazing, which is really interesting. Tell us some other kind of practical activities that we can do as preschool teachers or parents of preschoolers to help develop this empathy and this self-empathy.
Well, one of the things that I think is really interesting is, imagine if you're using empathy, then what you're really trying to do is walk in the shoes of what it's like to be a 1-year-old, or walk in the shoes of what it's like to be a 2-year-old, or even an infant. So, I mean, imagine yourself, if you're doing a mindfulness practice, just try this. For 7 minutes, try and remember, try and go back in time to what it's like to be that small and what it's like to be that powerless. And then add into that those deep feelings of like how small you are, how dependent you are, how powerless you are, and then you can't talk. So if you want to really get a deep sense of empathy for what it is like to be 6 months old, or a year, or a 2-year-old, imagine that. So what you want to do as the adult is you want to try and make yourself, I mean, this is the kind of thing psychologists do in play therapy. You want to make yourself small too. If you really are being empathic, you're getting down on their level. And fabulous early childhood educators, even teachers too with older children, what you see them do is they are down on the floor right away. They are not towering, they're not making their bodies big and their voices loud and their authoritarian stance, conveyed through facial expression and gestures. Absolutely not. They are down on the floor with a very soothing, quiet voice if the child is distressed. As we all know, of course, when you've got little ones, it's natural to put the higher pitched voice. Even with dog training, I learned this with my dog because I have a very badly behaved standard poodle. And what I learned is if I use my voice, like, come on, let's do this, she will be very badly behaved. But if I give her a really low command, like I'm growling at her, oh, she's starting to pay attention, she's behaving, and so on. Imagine what that sounds like to a little one, really threatening, really scary. So what we have to do is, if we're activating our empathy and we're using mindfulness as a way to go to that place, we are remembering what it's like not to be able to put your feelings or thoughts or needs into words so that people in your world can understand you. All you've got is the register of crying for the most part, and you try to do it as complex as you can because that's how you try and get them to understand you. Then you have language that's unbelievably basic, and you can't say complex things even though you understand them, you can't say them. All of these things are really deep empathy things. And what's pretty interesting in the research, and again, I must say this is my idea, so I can't say the neuroscientists have said this, but in the reading and the work that I've done and the learning that I have at the research that they've done, I can't help but wonder if sometimes what goes wrong with us as adults is we put children in the out group. And what the research shows is, as human beings, it is natural for us to create in-groups and create out-groups. And if we are being good educators, we are very careful that we're not doing that, because who you put in the in-group are people that are like you. So what I started to think about, and I built this into my course, and it's not proven by a scientist, but what I think is sometimes what happens to us as adults is we put little ones and we put teenagers even into the out group because we don't remember. They're not like us. They're so different in how they behave, how they communicate, the things that they do, that we don't think of them as profoundly similar to us. And these are the kinds of barriers we absolutely have to overcome to be our best selves with them and to help them the most and educate them the best. And that's an exercise, again, in mindfulness. We can use mindfulness as a way to tap into our deeply, deeply shared humanity with these little tiny people that need us.
Yeah, wonderful, great ideas. Well, thank you so much, Jennifer. Is there any last words that you want to share with our audience before we finish today?
One of the things that I think is really interesting in the reading and work that I've done that helps teachers and helps early childhood educators and parents or primary caregivers is that mindfulness doesn't have to be an added to in your day. It doesn't have to be yet another thing you're expected to do and you have to learn about and so on. What's beautiful about it is it naturally fits into everything that you want to do. So you know, when children are needing a moment to calm down, it's a great moment to talk to them about breathing, and then talk to them about air, and take them out in nature and show them that trees are breathing too. And we share breath with them, and this is nature. And there's just so many opportunities to have them focus on something, or use coloring like Dr. Stan Brodsky does. You know, coloring can become a very mindful activity as long as you're just bringing that consciousness to it. So it doesn't have to be a separate, you know, I'm closing my eyes and I'm doing something very different in my day. It actually can just be a part of everything that you do. And that's one of the wonderful things about it. And it just brings so much to the brain. So that would be my final, push for empathy and mindfulness.
Yeah, great advice. The whole concept of being, I think, and embodying that in the classroom is wonderful. So I just want to remind everyone, you can check out the free course from Jennifer, Neuroscience of Early Childhood Introduction. We'll have the link and the code to get into that course, and all of her social media and website. If you want to learn more or contact her, feel free to go into those resources. And thank you once again, Jennifer, for coming on and sharing all those ideas with us, and sharing your time with us today.
Thanks so much for having me, Helen.
Thanks.